as a young musician, we would advise, sort of that you get your head around this as soon as you can, because in this industry, you will be in a situation many times probably throughout your career where you will need to negotiate good rates and good pay for yourself. So master it now, and you'll find many benefits that sustain your career and get you to those good rates as you go on. Muriel McClymont and I, Francis Dredge, are going to be your tutors today, but we also have Maddie Radcliffe on the line with us, who is from the Musicians Union, and she'll answer questions for you about the MU, but also gather questions if you ask them as we go along, because we do have a Q&A session at the end. So if you want to say hello, please do so. There's a chat box at the bottom of your screen. But as I say, sort of ask questions as we go along. We'll answer them, so we can help you sort of pick out things that are particularly specific to you. So today, what we're going to do is have a quick look at what the MU do to help and support you. There's loads of information that they've done to make sure that they, sort of advice, information, etc., that will help you throughout your careers. But use that, because if you're not familiar with it at the moment, it's invaluable. So many people have told me that they have been able to negotiate much better deals through the MU's help and advice. So have a look online, and also talk to your regional officers. We are going to look at the sort of nuts and bolts of negotiation, how you prepare, and also then how you look at the different things that will go into each and every negotiation, because most will be slightly different. So you need to really know what you're doing and what your market rates are, things like that. Also, we'll have a look at your attitude to negotiation. A lot of people don't really like talking about money, but if you are a musician, a music professional, then you really do need to get to grips with this and sort of take it as part of your sort of working career as such. Sort of, I know what I'm worth, and I know what I'm going to ask for. So this should really be part of your work. And also at the end, we'll look at your professional attitude. Sometimes we can't always agree with our clients. We can't always get what we want, but we can build great professional relationships. So if we need to work with people again, we can. We've got a good reputation. People know that we're, sort of fair, that they can trust us, etc. So we'll have a little look at that towards the end. Okay, so as I say, if you've got any questions, then please ask. Just a quick look first, then as MU help and support. As I say, there's lots of it, so we do advise that you use it. In some cases, the MU have done a huge amount of work to actually negotiate rates already. So if you're going to be working for an orchestra, for example, then those rates have been negotiated along with things like sick pay, time off, breaks, all those sort of things. So you're sorted there. But there will be times in many situations, at festivals, for example, or if you're teaching or whatever the situation may be. Once again, the MU has put a lot of work into recommending rates. So you know your market rate, you know what you're worth. So at least you go in to every negotiation knowing vaguely what you should be asking for. And this is really helpful. You also get some great legal advice, and there's lots of one-to-one advice from your regional officers. So lots there to start off with. So if you haven't had a look at it, then do have a look at it and do use this great service. So we're going to look now at the nuts and bolts of negotiation. We're going to start off with what you want from each negotiation. Sounds obvious, but you'll be surprised how many people are going in not knowing really what they should be quoting. So Muriel, good morning.
Good morning. And the first point I want to make is, if you don't know what you want, how on earth are you going to persuade someone else to give it to you? Really, really important to be clear about what it is you're trying to get out from the negotiation. Really important to think about it. Think about it from all different aspects. And some of the things you can consider are, well, the obvious one is money, and not just whether you want a straight fee, whether profit share would be better, and also what's included. Is the PA included? Are the lights included? Promotion? All of these things you need to be considering in terms of what matters to you. Is travel included, or will that be paid separately? Then there's experience. That might be your number one priority with this particular piece of work. And especially if you're starting out in the industry, or if you're moving from one area to another, then getting a few hours under your belt in that area can be really important. and that can allow you to be more flexible in the other areas. And then there are contacts. Who you know still matters, and so networking, making contacts is always useful. And sometimes there might be a job or an opportunity come up where getting to know some people in the right area is really important. I know in my own personal experience, I took a really, what I consider to be a really piddling job, an admin job, but it was for an NLP training company that I really respected. And over the years, I've stayed in touch, and I do a lot of work with them that's certainly not admin, and I've wrote a chapter in an NLP book I'm very proud of. So sometimes doing some work to make contacts can lead to great things. Then there's exposure. Now, what I'm learning in the world of musicians is that exposure can be a euphemism for work for nothing, and that's certainly not what we're recommending. And in fact, the MU, if you've not looked at the Fair Play Guide, I highly recommend it. You certainly shouldn't be in a position where you're paying to play, and that's kind of done in some sneaky ways by getting you to commit to buying so many tickets, and then it's your responsibility to sell them. And if you don't sell them, you've actually paid money to turn up and play. So I'm not talking about that kind of exposure. I'm talking about the kind of exposure you get and be paid. And then promotion. You know, how is your social media? Because that's becoming more and more important, how you're going to help sell tickets and promote the gig. So, you know, you've got to take that into account. If you've got a really strong following, then you can use that in the negotiation, because you'll be able to help sell seats. You might have contacts to offer radio opportunities, and another thing to bear in mind is, will you be required to attend promotional events? So these are some of the things that you need to consider, and some of the others include, what are your timescales and deadlines? You know, it's, what other commitments do you have? Other band members, what commitments do they have? You've got to make sure that everything works for everybody. Is there music that has to be written or rehearsed? All these things you have to consider. Then there are non-negotiables. Maybe some of your band have nationalities that have visa restrictions for some countries, or maybe you would have to go and get some visas to travel wherever you're required. Unavailable dates, whether you want blue Smarties in the changing rooms, whether you need to have somewhere to unload your gear. Some of these things you need to bear in mind. Now, the thing about a non-negotiable is, as it suggests, is it's things that can't move. And if you have any non-negotiables, you've got to get them on the table immediately, because if you can't get what's your non-negotiable, then don't waste 2 hours talking about everything else. You might as well say, oh, we can't do that, oh, that's okay, and move on. And then, of course, there are the nice-to-haves. And the nice-to-haves could be things like access to rehearsal space. They could be first-class travel, or help setting up equipment and dismantling equipment after the gig. So those are just some of the things, that just in what you want, that you need to consider. Now Frances is going to take us through some of what the client might want.
Yes, so thanks, Muriel. So it's very important you have a clear idea of what you need from each negotiation, because otherwise you're going to misquote basically, and maybe sort of undermine what you're doing, undersell what you're doing, and actually not get enough money for it. But also, this obviously has to be in the context of what they want. It's when you negotiate, you're not looking to as a confrontation. You're looking to try and build a mutually beneficial deal. So if both people have what they want by the end of it, even though it might be slightly different to what you expected originally, then both parties will be happy. And that's a really good platform to build a good relationship from, because as you probably found out, so getting new work is quite time consuming and can be quite expensive. So what we're aiming for is not just to get one sort of piece of new work, but also to build our reputation so that we actually get more work from each client. So that becomes easier. So if you can get it right from the start, then you're going to build a nice foundation, a good path to work with that person in the future, hopefully. So always have a look and think, at this preparation stage, have a look and think, okay, so what would they really want from me? Apart from the quality of my work, apart from the performance, sort of people take that really for granted in some ways. There's lots of competition out there, as we know. So people are expecting us to be good, but there may be other things that they want too that maybe you can add as value in each negotiation. So think about what's important to them. Think about what, like you thought with yourself, sort of what are their must-haves. I've got to be there 2 hours before the gig, and I have to be there on a Wednesday on the 29th of November, or whatever it may be. But also, when you're talking to them, think about other things that might be valuable to them that you could add into that negotiation. Things like, sort of what sort of pressures are they under, and what sort of things can I do to make their lives easier? Because you'll find that people, want your performance, but also they work with people and make a deal on people when they like them, like to work with them. So, for example, I know a band who recently negotiated a wedding deal. Basically, they're gigging at a wedding, and the reason they got that gig was because the lead singer decided that she thought she'd go round a couple of days before, basically, to check the marquee, to check where the sounding, to reassure the bride. The bride was having a bridezilla moment. And they actually got that negotiation on that little bit of extra effort that didn't cost the lead singer much at all. But because the bride trusted them, because the bride felt reassured, they actually got that negotiation, and they actually got it. Their price was a little higher than the other bands that were competing for this particular gig. So, but the bride was willing to pay that because she trusted them. She felt secure with them. So think about those sort of things. Think about how you can bring your expertise to the client, and think about sort of how you can add value that way. So it doesn't cost you much, but it may be very valuable to them. Also think about at this stage, sort of what other things you might need to find out so you don't misquote. I like to do myself a little sort of mind map as such, and sort of ask myself some questions so I've got a really clear picture of what I need to think about. So, it might be sort of, where are we going to park? Is that going to cost money? Is that going to be free? Might be something like, why are they going to charge us a commission on our merchandising? Because we're playing at this festival for free, and that's how we're going to make our money. So really, they shouldn't be charging a commission on that. The NU have got lots of information on this, by the way, on festival rates. Who's involved? Who should I be negotiating with? What you don't want to be doing is spending a lot of time talking to somebody who actually can't make that decision. You want to be influencing people as you go along in a positive way. You never know when a contact is going to reappear in the future, but you do need to speak to the right people. It might be something like, what else do I need to find out? What do they actually expect me to do? What technical gear do they need? Those sort of things. Might be, how many hours are they expecting me to be there for? For example, if you're a teacher and somebody's asked you to do a day's workshop, what do they mean by that day? Now, the NU recommend that it's 5 hours, but if they're asking you to do 7 hours, then perhaps you need to charge a higher rate. So all these things are really important to think about beforehand, and to find out through the negotiation. So you quote and you don't lose, you quote correctly and you don't lose money. Okay, drilling down now into actually sort of how to work out your rate. And Mira's going to have a look at the scope and plan of a negotiation.
Excuse me. Yes, I mean, we've done the first two important steps. What do you want? What do they want? So then it's time to sort of drill down and get more specific about what you're actually negotiating for. And the first thing to do is to think about what your best outcome is. What would your ideal rate? And that can be hard if you've no idea what the going rate is. And as Frances has said, the wealth of rates on the MU website is fantastic in almost every area. But you can also ask colleagues. You can ask friends, colleagues who are in the business who might actually be able to give you some guidance of what they would expect to be paid there, or what they know people who are getting a certain rate, and that can help. And sometimes there'll be a range, because not everybody's going to get paid the same. You wouldn't expect necessarily someone who's been in the business for 40 years to get paid the same as someone who's on their first day. But if you've got an idea of what a range is, then you can gauge with your experience where you would place yourself on that. So it gives you an idea, it gives you a comfortable feeling for what you should be aiming for in the negotiation. And of course, what else is important to you? And by that I mean expenses. I was once offered working in sunny Wales, which of course is lovely, and I got what I thought was a good rate until I read the small print just before I accepted it, fortunately, where they said they wanted the rate included travel and subsistence. Well, it wasn't to Cardiff, it was to Aberystwyth and Bangor on a Sunday. And anyone who's tried taking a train from London to Aberystwyth and Bangor on a Sunday will know you can't get there till after lunchtime. And so I had to go the night before. So my travel and accommodation was actually ate a huge proportion of my rate. So fortunately I spotted it and went back and was able to negotiate something more reasonable for both of us. So things like location, number of times you're going to be going there, venue size, rehearsal time, rehearsal payments, all of these things. You know, what would your ideal outcome be? And if you have that clearly in your head, then the next step is to work out what the other extreme is. What's your bottom line? What's the absolute minimum that you can accept for this work? And there's a great way to work this out, is you work out all your expenses for a year. You know, what your rent or your mortgage, your living expenses, everything, your work expenses, add it all up and then divide it, work out time for holidays, time when you're unwell, time for when you're not working, and do an estimate of how many days you reckon you'll work in a year and divide your total expenses by that number, and that will give you a daily rate that should be your minimum daily rate. And it's really important that when you have that figure, that you understand that every time you work for less, it's actually costing you money. It's not sustainable. So really knowing that figure and being firm about that figure is really important. If that figure's very high, then you might want to look at making economies. If it's an unrealistic figure to be paid regularly, you might have to look at your lifestyle. Maybe the pool has to go. But you know, it's a really good way to figure out what is essential, what you need to earn. And then that gives you a range between your ideal outcome and your bottom line that you can negotiate between. And if you were ever tempted to work for less than your bottom line, oh, Frances has disappeared. Hopefully she'll come back in a second. There are occasions when you might be tempted to work for less than your bottom line. But I would say if you know what it is, then you can be really clear about why you're doing that and what the point is, and also make sure it's for a short period of time, because working for below your bottom line is not sustainable. And a really important point I want to hammer through is you absolutely cannot survive for long if you're working below what your expenses are. Your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And that's basically, and the fancy way of saying, your plan B. So what will you do if this negotiation doesn't work and you have to walk away? What's your alternative? Now, this doesn't have to be anything particularly spectacular. It just has to be, you know, it could be as simple as, I'll stick with bar work because it's flexible and I can drop it and take up other work if it comes up. You know, if there's no point in signing up for something that leaves you worse off than your plan B. So I think that's really important. Now, people get very stuck on this idea that the only thing they're negotiating is the price and money. And there are so many other things to consider when you're negotiating. The venue, what about its size, its location? What about equipment, getting equipment there, getting help with equipment? What about support? Expenses for travel, transport costs. You know, I mentioned my situation with going to Wales nearly for free. And then there are things like number of hours worked. Now, Frances mentioned that the MU has details of a standard working day, and for training that's 5 hours. But there are other ways that you can be flexible when negotiating hours worked. It could be possible, especially if you're doing something technical, that if you're very experienced and they want someone to do 4 days to do it, but not at a very high rate, you could negotiate doing that in 2 days for the same money. So, you know, if you're flexible and people, because sometimes the person you're negotiating with, they've got a budget They're not really too worried about how you do it. So as long as you actually do the work, you can end up getting caught up in a debate about hours when all you really need to do is shift the discussion onto what do you need doing, and that you're prepared to pay for that. I can do it in 2 days. Then there's the scope of work. The client doesn't always know and understand what you're doing and what you need. So you have to make sure that you're very clear about your requirements and that the client understands them. But when I talk about scope of work, what else can you do? Sometimes, especially if you don't have a knowledgeable client, they might have organized someone else to support you technically when that's something you could quite easily do yourself. And because you're already there, that would save the client money. So you would get paid more, but the client would spend more. I interviewed someone for a case study once, and he was a musician, and he got a job at the local college because he was very technically minded. And then he became the go-to guy on the technical front. And then he ultimately worked his way up until he was running a BTEC on the technical side. And he left that to become to open his own studio in the end, and actually stop performing altogether. So sometimes the scope of work, if you're flexible about it and you're prepared to sort of give and take, can end up in all sorts of interesting places. So there's also things about being creative about how the work is done, you know, how you can overcome issues, work with the client to solve problems rather than be fixed about what you're trying to achieve. And then there's exchanging unrelated benefits. Now that can include rehearsal space, and rehearsal space not necessarily for the work you're discussing with the client. If somebody has an empty area and you can use it for other things, then that's something that has a value and a benefit to you, but no cost to the client. So that's something you can bring into the negotiation. Admin, technical support, that's something, and these go both ways. You might have space, you know, you might have expertise, they might have the expertise. Social media support, that can go both ways. Copying, printing facilities. It's really about thinking outside the box. How can the two of you work together in new ways? So there's so many other ways of other aspects of a negotiation than just price. So it's really about staying flexible. And what we're going to do now is actually give you a little demonstration, something we've prepared earlier. Now, the funny thing, even though we've put a lot of emphasis on preparing, the example we're actually sharing with you is one where somebody has a negotiation kind of sprung on them. And I think that's actually quite realistic. So a lot of the preparation that we've talked about is preparation that you could really be thinking about before you've even working, you know, negotiating for a specific opportunity, like knowing your bottom line. I think that's something, if you don't currently know that, you should go off and actually work out right now, because that really helps. And there's just some basic things. So we're going to take you through two examples. One where maybe not do quite as well, and then the other one that hopefully would do slightly better. So just to explain, and I'll put this on a different screen. I'm a singer who works regularly Friday and Saturday evening for the same club. Francis is the owner of the club and wants me to do some extra work for no extra money. So let's see how this goes. Hi, Francis, you wanted to see me?
Yeah, thanks for popping in. Just wanted to discuss an idea with you, actually, Muriel. We've had some great feedback about your work, so that's good. And I've got a couple of things I want to think about for the future.
Right, thanks. Yeah,
so basically, I was thinking that it would be really good for us if you could come in at half an hour earlier on a Friday and Saturday night, and maybe then play an extra set of 45 minutes after you've done your first one. Maybe have a 10-minute break or whatever, and then do a sort of an extra set. I don't think it would sort of put you out much, would it?
Oh, I don't suppose it would really. I mean, I assume that would be at the same rate.
Well, actually, it's a trial, really. So I wasn't, we can't really afford to pay you any extra for it because we don't really know what's happening. But what I thought, it would give you some extra exposure, and sort of basically we've got a pub that's open down the road, and we certainly don't want people going there, because we'll lose business. So I was just hoping basically that you could do it because it would help us out and it would be good for you too.
Yeah, well, I have commitments on Saturday morning. I need to get up early. I'm not sure if it really does suit me as it happens.
Well, okay, I can see where you're coming from. So what would be good then in that case, so you can get your beauty sleep, I suppose, is if you come in an hour earlier and then play those two sets, and then you can get off home really easy. Because what I'm worried about here is that we sort of do catch the early birds, and we do get people to stay later. And basically, if we don't get more custom in, then we're both going to lose our jobs. And I'm sure you don't want that. So I really appreciate if you could, just play the extra, and we'll see how it goes then in the future.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I suppose so.
Great, fantastic. See you at 9 sharp then on Friday. Brilliant, thank you.
So I didn't really stand up for myself very well there, did I? And then I went and gave that feeble excuse about having things to do on Saturday morning, which Frances then jumped on and used to sort of she kind of solve that problem for me, which made it really hard for me to stick to my guns. So I kind of felt a bit cornered, and then I just accepted her logic and her reasoning, even though I wasn't happy. And I think I would probably grudge every minute of that extra time that I would do for her. So let's try again. Let's see if we can do that a bit better. Hi, Francis, you wanted to see me?
Hi, Muriel, thanks for coming in. We're getting some great feedback about that set you're doing for us on Friday and Saturday night. So I've got like an idea I would like to discuss with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, great, great, thanks.
So what I was thinking basically is that you could come in, say, half an hour earlier, and then actually do another set, so additional set for us. So that would help us out, and it would be great, so we can see if we can get some more customers through the door.
Yeah, yeah. Would that be at the same rate?
Now, I wasn't thinking, I don't think we can afford to pay you basically because we don't know if we're going to get drum up any more business with this yet, and it's I think it'll probably be better exposure for you, which is great, isn't it? And it's helping us out. So and you said that it's not going to cause you sort of much problem staying afterwards. You're usually hanging around afterwards late anyway. So would that be okay?
I would love to help you out, but I would expect to be paid for the additional set.
But I don't. The thing is, I don't because it's a trial and error type thing. I don't know if we can afford it yet, and so I was just thinking, if we could try it out, basically, then we'll see what happens from there.
Right.
Because basically, so if we don't get some new work, then we don't get some new work in that pub down the road. It's definitely getting more customers, and I don't really want to, both of us to lose our jobs. Would you?
No, no, I definitely don't want that. I think you've got a great idea, and you said you've had great feedback. So the whole point is to get more people through the door. Well, if you're successful and you get more people through the door, they're going to spend more at the bar, which will cover my costs with plenty to spare. So I'd love to do the extra set, but I'm sure you'll understand I would have to be paid. You wouldn't expect the bar staff to do an extra hour, or two unpaid, would you?
Yeah, but that's different, isn't it? Because like they work really hard, and so if you enjoy your job, you're always banging on about how much you love playing.
I love my job, but I also enjoy eating. So look, I really want to help you. And if you can't pay for the extra time, that's fair enough. And I'm happy to move my set to an earlier slot if you think that one would be better for you.
No, okay, so I can see a point, I suppose, and I don't, I would like both basically. So you have made a good point. So I suppose let's just try it out on Friday and Saturday then at your usual rate, and we'll take it from there then. Basically, is that okay with you?
That's great. Okay, look forward to it.
Great, thanks.
So this time I was a lot firmer about being paid, and I didn't make any random excuses that didn't give Francis the wiggle room to sort of try and beat me down. Um, and I was happy to be flexible. I wanted to help, so I said, well, if the timing's the problem, I can move my slot. And then I actually pointed out that you wouldn't expect to get the bar staff to work for free for an extra hour. You just wouldn't. You wouldn't expect a plumber to come in and work for free. You wouldn't expect a solicitor to work for free. So why would you play or sing for free just because you enjoy what you do? So I thought that went much better, and I would certainly be happy to do that extra work now. And it's worth saying that sometimes when in a situation like that, you won't actually reach agreement. You know, you might actually have to go away. It might involve 2 or 3 conversations, and that's okay. And you might not agree. It's not up to you to sort of solve the problem. You know, you don't have to give in just because they're persistent. So on that, we'll come back to our original screen, and I'll pass on to Frances to talk about bartering.
Yeah, so you can see it just from the example. We hope you can see from the example is that in the first example, really Muriel wasn't really prepared or willing to sort of barter. She was like so railroaded by me. So part of negotiation is the willingness to do this, and so we're going to encourage you now, even though it's a competitive industry, and people, seem that people are doing maybe work that's not possibly free work or even sort of too cheap work. Then we're going to encourage you to sort of get a better attitude towards negotiation. You've spent years probably, sort of refining your skills and your talent. It's a gift in many ways, but you have to do so much work to actually keep those standards. And as Muriel was saying, an organizer wouldn't do the work for nothing. A bar person wouldn't do the work for nothing. Sort of a doctor wouldn't do the work for nothing. So why should you? So you really do have to get into the attitude, if you're going to sustain your professional career, of valuing your work and knowing what goes into it. Because as we know, people may see a performance, they may see a brilliant music teacher, they may see a brilliant performance on stage, but we know there's so much that goes into that. So sometimes, it's about you valuing that. Take it, so as part of your work, as part of your professional work, as something you do every day, not something to shy away from, something that's not very nice to discuss. Sort of make a commitment to yourself that you are, you're in this industry as a professional, and professionals expect to be paid. Also, people will ask you to do work for free, but don't just say yes all the time. I've talked to quite a lot of young musicians who feel pressurized to say yes, but you can always go back and ask them for a particular rate. So, for example, if a charity asks you to do work for free, then remember that they do have budgets a lot of the time. So if it's a charity of your, a particularly heartfelt charity, then maybe you will want to give them a discount, basically. So if you go back and say, look, I really want to work with you, I really want to do this, but we're a 6-piece band here, so we actually, we do actually need to get paid for this. We can give you a significant discount. We can give you 25% off. Is that okay? And they go back and look at their budgets then and go, actually, that's a really fair rate. So you're giving something, but you're not doing it for free. If you can't actually get money, going back to what we were talking about originally, about exposure, about promotion, all those sort of things, is there anything else that you can get from them that's valuable to you? So would you be able to get a venue to practice in? Would you be able to do a gig or do something you've never done before, so you can add it to your portfolio? Be careful with this, because what you don't want to be working for free, but there may be other things that are valuable that you can get from a client that will actually make it worth your while. So think about those things. Also, remember, it may seem, as a young person, or as any creative really, or musician, it may seem that the other person has got the buying power, so they're on top and you're below, but that's not the case. Don't go in with that attitude. Go in with the attitude, look, I've got something to offer here. They wouldn't be talking to me unless I had something, unless they wanted to for me to come and perform for them or to teach them, etc. So I'm equal in this. I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing. I'm incredibly talented. So I'm going to go there with an attitude of I'm going to get what I need from this. And also, when you're negotiating, don't agree to anything straight away. So, for example, you might want to agree as you go along, agree on specific terms. So you might say to, I don't know, somebody that was asking you to cut your fee, you might say something like, well, if I cut my fee by 50%, can you guarantee me 6 gigs over the summer? That might be worth doing for you. So you're taking it conditionally. So looking at the negotiation model, when you start to negotiate, you sort of open up the negotiation, discuss all the different variables, things like expenses, where you should be, how much the rate's going to be per hour or per gig or per workshop or whatever it may be. And then some things you won't agree on or are not necessary, and some things you will agree on. So then you close the negotiation, so you're agreeing on particular specific points. So yes, you will be paying travel and subsistence. Yes, you will be paying £33 an hour for my teaching workshop. Yes, the technical equipment will be there for me. So all those sort of things you've agreed now, because what you don't want to do is leave it to later on when you're actually working for somebody and all these problems then arise, and that can cause huge amounts of difficulties along the way. And you often can't go back once you've negotiated a deal, agreed to something. You can't go back and renegotiate it often. And also, once you've agreed to something that's not valuable to you or is not a good rate for you, it's very hard to go back and get people to pay more. You can start high and they'll possibly negotiate lower, but starting low is not really a way to go. So do consider that. Okay, so we're sort of coming towards the end of the webinar, and we're going to look now at being professional, because you're not, this is not a hobby for you. You are a professional musician, and it's really important to keep this in mind. Muriel.
Well, just before I say that, I just noticed a question from Stephen saying, is promised future work a good enough reason to work for free? And I would say probably not. I mean, if you wouldn't say to a solicitor, you wouldn't say to a plumber or an electrician, could you just mend these lights or these appliances, and next time I'll pay you. It's, you know, when you think about other contexts and other industries, it seems like a bizarre thing to do. And I think the problem with actually doing something for free with the promise of something else coming down the road is, I think very often it never happens. And what else, if they genuinely have got no money to pay you, what else could they give you that you would be happy to accept? Frances is frozen again. I say this because she can't always tell, so I always sort of mention it so she can sort her line if that's possible. So I would say, we do this one free and we'll pay you next time. I would be very, very reluctant to do that. Okay, so just going on to keeping it professional. I think always aim for a win-win negotiation. It's, in the olden days, negotiations were considered adversarial. Somebody had to win, somebody had to lose. Well, it's a small world out there, and with social media, it's getting smaller and smaller. And there's absolutely no benefit to leaving a trail of enemies, or, you know, people with resentments, or folk trying to get you back, or feeling that you want to get people back, or feeling that you've been used and abused. Because there's something about, if you stand up for yourself and you're clear about what you need and what you want, you won't always get the work, but you will get people's respect. And I know I've hired people because they were cheap, and then gone back to the ones that stood their ground saying, no, can't do it for less. And I went back to them with more respect for having stood up for themselves. So I think that's really important. You can really disagree with people without having to fall out with them. You can be really friendly. Oh, I really understand that this is an issue for you. I can't be your solution because I have certain levels that I need to meet. I have things that I need. And it's so important not to take things personally. Nothing is intended personal. A low rate, if you're offered a low rate, it doesn't necessarily mean someone's trying to insult you or offend you. It probably just, they might be, but it probably just means that, you know, that's all they have in the budget and that's all they can afford. So instead of being offended, you just go, oh, you know, I usually work for 5 times that fee. So if you don't have more money in the budget, I can't help you this time. Or see what else they have to offer that's not money and isn't exposure. So it's about just treating people like human beings and focusing on the problem as separate to the people involved. And I have a mental picture where I actually see myself getting up and walking round to the same side of the table, so that the two people can stand there going, that problem over there, how can we work out a solution? And that's much better than you facing each other going, you're the problem, no, you're the problem. So it's a different mindset that you're taking into negotiation. Can you work together? Can you solve this? And it's important that everybody's looking at this from their own viewpoint. Nobody's wrong, but you're just trying to look for that, having enough crossover and enough in common to be able to create a deal from this. Sorry, were you going to say something, Francis?
Yeah, it was. It's just Stephen's asked a good question, actually. He says the world of music is arguably more competitive than other trades. People are willing to pull all sorts to get their foot in the door. How do we compete with that? It's a really good question, Stephen. What I'd say there is I completely understand your point of view, and it does, and some people will. But the trouble is, so if you're not going to charge for your work, then you can't really call yourself a music professional. And some people are getting paid. So in this case, if you don't ask, you'll never get. And if you go down that path of performing for free, then how can you sustain that? And this is why actually getting to grips with negotiation is quite important, because we're not talking just about money here. We're talking about other valuable things to people. So when you're building relationships and making good contacts and talking to people about your work and telling them why they should be paying you, then that's going to help. I'm not saying you're always going to get what you need, what you want, but unless you ask, then you're not having got a chance for it of doing that. And if you take the attitude of, oh, well, it's so competitive, which it is, that I'll never get paid, then you won't. So what I'd say is you've got to make an effort, basically, because eventually you will get your foot in the door and you will, start getting paid. So, start doing it from now and sort of have a go at it and consider what you're putting in, because otherwise, so you could be years without getting paid, and that's not really sustainable. Do you agree, Muriel?
Absolutely. And I know Maddie, I think she's put a comment there to say that people who've been asked to work for free, who then went, actually, is there not anything in the budget you can give me? 30% of them actually got money for performing. So, quite often, just because the money's not being offered doesn't mean it's not there. But there's something about respecting your own creativity. There's something about respecting what you do and being prepared to say it has a value and understanding what your unique selling points are. And so that you can say, but do you want cheap or do you want good? And actually being able to justify why you should be paid, because you're reliable, you do what you say you do on the tin, people are entertained by you. Things don't go wrong because you take the necessary steps to make sure that your equipment's looked after and that you're looked after. So I think it's like being prepared to stand and argue your corner and make comparisons with, if it is a charity event, point out that they're paying for the venue, they're paying for the waiting staff, they're paying for the caterers. Why shouldn't they pay something for the musicians? So it's really, you can't compete against people who say, I'll do it for nothing, and but it's you don't want to join them, because then everybody just gets in a race to the bottom.
Yeah. There's another good question, actually, from Natalia. Is there such a thing as quantifiable exposure? If so, would you be able to point out some? Natalia, off the sort of top of my head, so I think there probably is, but you've got to be very careful about this. So, for example, if you're putting a video clip on YouTube, then that's quantifiable exposure. A lot of people will hopefully make a hit on YouTube. They'd have a look at your work and maybe go off and buy some of your music, or they might think, I want to go and see this in concert. So that's some exposure that you're creating. Or there might be sometimes, sort of a one-off situation where there's some experience you really, really need to have in your portfolio. So, for example, if you go and play at a gig that you've never been to before and you decide that, you're only going to take travel expenses for it, then maybe, but also you can maybe take your merchandise and stuff along. That's exposure, but also then you can go to other clients. You have recorded your performance. You can go to other clients then and say, look what I can do. Whereas before you wouldn't have had that, sort of show that you wouldn't be able to say that I've already done this. So sometimes it's reasonable. But this is why, sort of, you have to really consider, is there value in this for me? When I, started off in my 20s all those years ago, it was great, but basically, sort of, there was sometimes I had to, sort of get some experience because that was the foot in the door. But you have to plan it and not give it away from free. So if it's a plan thing for you, if you're planning, right, okay, if I get this, then I'll be able to get that, great. But do recognize that if you give your work away for free, it's very hard with that client to get them to pay in future. So
I'd say that there's another side to exposure, and there's another side to giving stuff away from free. There's one thing being asked to do stuff for free for somebody else's profit, but there's also scope to do stuff for free for yourself. And I was speaking to a musician recently who had got a clip of them performing a cover song that they'd done on stage, and it went up on YouTube and it got circulated on social media. And the person who wrote the song saw it and put a comment to say, what a great version of that song. Well, there's exposure that you've created that you can then use to sell you into to get work. So, you know, exposure doesn't have to be something other folk are exploiting you for. If you're going to give stuff away, you control what you're giving away and who to and how you're doing it. So
And
I think
why, basically, yeah.
fine.
We've got another question actually from Stephen again. How could you know for sure what the client's overall budget is? They can simply say that they've got a tight budget to pressure a low fee for musician services. That's true, Steve. And usually, you know, sort of when I'm negotiating, you know, I'll actually ask the client up front, you know, so what are you expecting to pay for this particular thing? I've usually, by this time, I've actually, you know, sort of clarified exactly what they want from me and exactly what I can offer. I've also worked out my rates, because I usually start off with a top rate and then, you know, think about my bottom rate, what I can afford to go down to. But so work it out first, but also then, you know, ask them what's your budget. And if they say, you know, it's very tight, then that's fine, you know. So, well, I understand that. So this is what I charge. And then the negotiation begins, basically, because some people will use that as an excuse, but some people will. Not everybody is in the market, you know, to screw people down. Some people just genuinely have tight budgets. And what the good thing is to do, if you can plan to balance your portfolio. So, for example, with some companies, I charge them much higher rates than other companies. I work for a couple of corporations, and they tend to have bigger budgets. So I'll charge them more, and they expect to pay more. Whereas I might charge somebody else, you know, sort of much less. But as long as I'm balancing out my portfolio, that's okay, and not going down under an acceptable rate. So that's how I work it out. But ask them as far as budget's concerned.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the clearer you are about what you want to get paid, to some extent, it's your judgment on that. If they're not sharing their budget, and they don't have to share their budget, they can just say it's too expensive. They don't have to tell you, but it's your judgment whether you do the work or not. So, you know, if you're clear about what you need to earn, then you can be confident in what you say, you know, you want to be paid. And as Frances says, then the negotiation can begin. Anyway, well, I just finished the next slide, and then we can do the summary and then take any further questions. We're so close to the end. Just in the spirit of keeping it professional. Now, the first thing I want to say, sometimes you will meet aggressive behaviour or people who are just a bit agitated. Now, the first thing I would say straight away is don't accept properly aggressive or bullying behaviour. If you should never feel threatened or afraid or attacked, say that straight away. You just get yourself out of that situation. You just leave. What I'm talking about really is when somebody's having a bad day or they've just fallen out with someone and they walk in and they're you know, there's a lot of anger coming off them. The first thing is to stay calm, keep your cool, and don't assume it's about you, because 9 times out of 10 it's not going to be about you. And even if it is about you, if you stay calm, you'll help them get calm. And I know that a tip from an HR professional, let them vent. You know, if you've got somebody who's got a head of steam, let them get it off their chest. And my friend, who's a very good HR person, she used to say they'd come into her office and they'd just sort of like basically shout for 15 minutes. And when they finished, she'd go, right, could you just tell me that all again and I'll take notes this time? And it's like, and she said the second time you would get a far calmer, and then by the time they've said it again, they'd be the best of buddies. So it's a nice tactic just to sort of let someone calm down. Everything's about relationship. You know, don't burn bridges if you don't have to. If someone's just had a bad conversation with someone else and they walk in and they're a bit agitated, and you take it personally and you respond as if they're being cross with you, it can only deteriorate. So by actually staying calm and just sort of saying, oh right, you're having a bad day, even if you don't say that out loud, it can be a better way to diffuse it. Take breaks. If conversation is getting heated, if people are getting upset or worked up, take a break, just say, well, let's grab a coffee, I'll make a phone call, I'll get more information. Really important to understand in a negotiation, if you have to walk away without an agreement, that is perfectly okay. And the aim should be to walk away on good terms. You don't have to find a solution. That's what your BATNA, your best alternative to negotiated agreement, is for. It's your plan B in your back pocket to say, this isn't going as well, I'm not getting what I want. Never mind, maybe next time. And as long as you're focused on maintaining a decent relationship, there's a very high chance there will be a next time. I always see a negotiation, the worst possible outcome is that it's a networking opportunity. So if you go in with that headspace, that mindset, it can be a really good way to sort of meet people and interact. You were able to do business, not this time. And people remember that you've been professional and calm and approachable, and that you've had a balanced conversation. So another thing that's really important is to remember to get things in writing. An awful lot of stuff gets agreed on the hoof, and it's really important to go away, send an email confirming, or use some of the template letters and contracts on MU's site. That's not always possible, but whenever you can, get back by email. Now, it's a lot of things are agreed now on social media, either by text or by messaging. Now that's not ideal, and I know the MU would rather you didn't, if you want their support in arguing the toss. If you are going to do it, make sure if you're making agreements but fine detail, make sure you're not using texting slang like the letter for, you. Make sure you're using proper words and that you've got screenshots so you've got a record. But ideally, you'll go away and confirm it in an email. So those are just some of the aspects of being professional and working professionally. And I'll hand back to Frances to sum up.
Okay, well, thanks very much. We're coming up to the end of the webinar now. So if you've got any questions or more questions, then please do ask. I just wanted to sort of sum up what we've been talking about today. So firstly, do use your union, the Editions Union, with all of this. The support is invaluable, basically. There's so many people telling me that, it was just fantastic for them. Maddie will let you know sort of all the information that's available. As far as negotiation itself, be willing to negotiate. It is a competitive industry. Fine, but any industry worth being in is competitive. You've got something, you've got a talent, you've worked very hard at it, and it's worth something, but you're the first person who has to be convinced of that. The more control you can take, the better results you'll get. Okay, if you won't get what you want every time, but in this case, that saying, if you don't ask, you don't get, is completely true, because somebody is being paid. Lots of people are being paid decent rates, and though there's some sort of people who want to sort of get things for free or want to get some sort of dubious rate, a lot of people are very reasonable. So going with the attitude of expect the best and prepare for the worst, but don't whatever you're taking, make sure you're happy with it, because you may love performing now, but if you can't feed yourself, and if you think people are devaluing your work, then you won't enjoy it so much. It will affect your performance. So get that attitude right, and you'll do much better from it. And you want to create those opportunities for you to play, or for to create your portfolio of work, whatever you particularly are doing. Make sure you do the prep. Sometimes it can be a couple of minutes, and the more experience you get, the quicker it will be. But sometimes you'll be negotiating quite complicated contracts that may end up in a different place than you expected. But as long as both parties are happy, then you're fine. As long as you've given yourself a really good chance, then the result is better. Also, so be willing and keep it professional, because this industry is a very small industry. You'll meet probably people time and time again. And while you may not be able to work together now, there is possible potential for the future. So, we always want to leave any sort of negotiation or any working relationship on a good note if we can, because who knows what will happen in the future. We may, sort of end up working very closely with that particular person if we've left it on a good note. And just finally, it's easy to get things in writing. Email, as Muriel says, there's lots of MU templates and letter templates to use, but a simple email is fine. Just summarizing those bullet points that you've agreed on. Get that sorted now before you start working, and that'll avoid problems in the future. It's all clear now. You both know where you're coming from, so that's sorted, and then you can actually start performing and enjoying yourself. I know this does seem, sort of sometimes, these sort of skills seem a bit like, well, it's nothing to do with being a musician, but it is really, if you want to support your career, just start thinking of it as something, that you're going to do because it's part of your working life. Okay, so Maddie, have we got any more questions? Where are you? I'm just going to get Maddie Radcliffe back on the line. If she's available. She's coming on now.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
My name is Maddie and I'm Campaigns and Public Affairs official here. I've been Oh, there we are. That sometimes happens when someone new comes in. We did have a couple of good questions. Anne asks about how to work out the daily rate we talked about, your kind of cost of being a musician and how to work out a daily rate after that. So could you take us through that again?
Yeah, I mean, basically it's taking all your costs, all your living costs, what you need to survive, and it's up to you whether you want to add money in there for holidays, etc. as well. But then, so if you work out in a year, because it's easier to do it with a cover of fluctuation in a year, work out how much money you need to take in, and then work out how many days you're likely to be working, and then divide the big figure by the number of days, and you'll get how much you need to earn every working day. And then you can, if you've got days where you're earning more than that, then that starts going towards extra holidays. and if not, it might compensate for those days when you've been prepared to work for slightly less than that. But it gives you a really good baseline for understanding how much you need to earn.
Cool. Oh. Yeah. We there? Oh, brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's answered your question, Anne, but if you've got any more, write it in the comments. How often is that a process you should go through, checking those costs?
That's a good question. I mean, I have to say, I think I've done that early on, and I think as costs have risen and you've worked out, if I'm honest, it's something I do when I sort of think, that's funny, I should have more money left than I actually do. And then I'll do that exercise to go, that's why. And then maybe it's time to increase my rate.
Actually, because I do when I do my accounts once a year, so I think I may as well do all the finance stuff now because I work for myself, So I do it once a year, and I think, okay, so next year, what do I need to be earning? What's the lowest I can charge? And am I back?
You're back.
Yeah, great. What would I like to charge? What's my highest rate I'd like to earn? But what's my bottom? Because you tend to balance your portfolio, because sometimes you will accept work that's much lower than you're sort of like what you'd like, but it's okay if you're getting something from it, and as long as you can balance your accounts at the end of the year. Okay, well, I earned 75 quid for that day, but I earned 150 for that day, so I'm still on line for actually supporting myself. Because as much as we all, I'm a creative person, as much as we would all love just to create, we do have to support ourselves as well, and also our work is valuable, so we do have to get what we need from it. So that's how I work it out once a year when I'm doing my accounts.
It's
much more organised than me.
I personally have to be organised, because I'm not very good with my money. I'm good with other people's money. But when it comes to my money, I will spend it and end up not being able to pay my tax, all that sort of thing. When I first started working for myself, that's the situation that I got in, and I learned from that. But also, I want my I want my work to be valued, basically. So I think that my work is valuable. So that's why I want to know exactly what I can quote for it.
It's also worth mentioning that there's loads of tax advice and other advice to do with finances, and I think an FEU training workshop on finance as well. So if anyone's interested, you can find all of that information on bmu.org, which is our website. We've got a few more questions coming in. Svetlina asks about private lessons and doing contracts with students at the beginning of lesson sessions. What I would suggest is you go to the music education area on our website, where you can actually find the sample contract, but also information about getting it in writing. And just to follow up on Stephen's question about being alienated by a contract, we have template contracts. People can just print them off, fill them out and use. we know that they can be quite difficult. In those cases, you can look at them, get in touch with your regional office, take a look at what information is on there, what kinds of information you need to get in writing, and use those contracts really as a guide. And I think that's the way, if you're nervous of putting a contract in front of somebody, which can be quite nerve-wracking, especially when you're young or new, that is the way around it. But getting the information that's on those contracts is really, really important. It enables us to follow it up if there's a question. It makes sure you have your responsibilities clearly outlined, and also your engagers' responsibilities to you are clearly outlined too, and that is absolutely invaluable. There was one more question. Anne asked about support acts. Again, that's one I'd have a chat with your regional office. So whether you're a support act or whether you're hiring a support act or booking a support act, the situation varies. Obviously, we'd like everyone to get MU rates as a minimum, but that doesn't always work out, in which case you need that kind of discussion and a conversation about business models and that kind of thing. So I think that will be really, really, really useful. And again, cmu.org, it has all of the contacts for every regional office on the homepage.
Great. Well, thanks very much, everybody. We're coming to the end of the session. Coming to the end of the session now. Good luck with everything. So as I say, do have a go, because you've got all this talent basically, and it's got such a value to society. Then you really need to take control of this and make sure that you set yourself up now for the rest of your career as such. And people respect you if you know that you have a value. They sense it if you don't think so. So do give it a go. Maddie's going to send out the presentation, and also the recording when it's up, and also any other information you need. So please do stay in touch, and we'll hopefully speak to you soon. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.